So we want you to take a second or two to look at this slide and read this quote from Dr. Pedro Noguera, who is a national scholar around really looking at schools as a system that really perpetuates the achievement gaps that we see in our society. And we chose this quote because it really illustrates the why behind our theory of action around the role that leaders play in terms of really guaranteeing the success of historically underrepresented students, particularly students of color. If we as leaders do not possess cultural competence to be able to put race on the table in discussing leadership practices such as what curriculum has been taught, what instructional strategies are being employed in every classroom, who has been hired to teach our students, and how resources are being allocated with a specific lens of equity, we fail to prepare all students to be college and career ready. The textbooks one of the textbooks that we read this term by Fowler argues that public policy includes the government's expressed intentions in official enactments. And the intention and the value that are embedded into SB290 are that this policy would drive increased student outcomes to support Oregon's 40-40-20 goal. Another value is to honor each school district's ability to design assessment tools that are context-specific within the parameter of state standards that are already being outlined by our TSPC. Another assumption here is that there's a positive relationship between administrative effectiveness and student learning outcomes. And again, going back to our theory of action, here is that when we as administrators and leaders are effective in all 6 standards and demonstrate principles of equitable practices in all 6 areas, then we as a system will be able to close the achievement gap. And the implementation of a sound evaluation system is critical to producing equitable outcomes where student success is no longer predictable based on race, class, language, and family background.
So some of the key actors in Senate Bill 290 on the government side would be the U.S. Department of Education, the Oregon Department of Education, the Teacher Standards Practices Commission, the Oregon Education Investment Board, Oregon legislators, and local school boards in the districts. Some non-governmental actors would be the Confederation of Oregon School Administrators, so COSA, the Oregon Education Association, which is OEA, Oregon School Boards Association, which is OSBA, Chalk Board, Stand for Children, Higher Education Institutes, Oregon Association of Latino Administrators, or OALA, and Oregon Leadership Network, so OLN. The defining issues for, or one of the defining issues for Senate Bill 290, or some of them, is that administrator evaluation is tied to student growth outcomes, and that professional practice and responsibilities are also tied to an administrator's evaluation. So if you look in the Oregon Matrix model, the y-axis is all about rating the professional practices and professional responsibilities of educators, and the x-axis is about rating student learning growth goals that educators have. So the point of this is to use multiple measures to determine how an administrator is doing to meet student growth, and it allows for increased cultural competence and equitable practices for administrators.
So there are some legislation and funding implications. So SB 290 is part of the ESEA waiver, and it's designed to maintain what funding there is that's currently available. It's not redistributing or creating new funds, but for those schools that are receiving funds, SB 290 helps by following through with what's asked of in the waivers. Districts are actually responsible for creating their own metrics and their own training. So districts are left with the work of implementing SB 290.
So in terms of steps or barriers or obstacles for implementation of this policy, one of the big obstacles is the inconsistency across the districts in terms of measuring the effectiveness of the SB290 policy, and due to a lack of clear definition or measure of cultural competency and equitable practices. At the same time, we see in many districts across the state of Oregon, that we don't have standard rubrics or metrics, and is no accountability for increase the cultural competency in students' outcomes. At the same time, the calibration or inconsistent training for implementation of evaluations. I can speak for my district that is pretty much zero the professional development that my evaluators are getting in order for them to sit with principals or other administrators and evaluate them following a rubric. So it's really we see an inconsistency across the states and across the state of Oregon that we're hoping at some point will change. In the recent revision of the ISLLC, or Interstate School Leaders Licensure Consortium, by the CCSSO, or Council of Chief State School Officers, we can see as well the lack of attention to equity.
So how do we know SB 290 is making any difference? So here are some of the things that we've identified as far as really measuring successful implementation of SB 290. The first two bullets really show more of a tangible benefits of implementing SB 290. And the first bullet talks about elimination of achievement gaps, and those things are really can be measured using what's currently in the system as far as really measuring our achievement compact standards. So it's nothing new, but we really need to be able to use those metrics that we use to assess how we are doing in relation to meeting our Oregon's 40-40-20 goal that have been really articulated by achievement compact measurements. And the last two bullets that we consider are really intangible benefits of implementing SB 290 with fidelity. There's another law that passed in 1991 that talks about Oregon Minority Educators Act of 1991, and it essentially talks about the need for having educators, including administrators, reflect the diversity of our student population, and currently the goal hasn't been met. And we feel that the more students, and particularly students of color, are being successful by having effective administrators, that they will consider teaching as a profession. And once they go into teaching as a profession, then they will consider going to administration as a profession as well. So our hunch is that successful implementation of SB 290 really serves as a pipeline to really increase the diversity of our educators, including our administrative leaders. And again, implementation of a sound evaluation system that explicitly calls for culturally competent leadership practices that lead to equitable outcome is critical to actualizing our 40-40-20 goal in the state of Oregon.
So as we talk about SB 290 and we talk about how it relates to core papers and big picture of policy and practice, as educational leaders, we recognize that this has a true impact on our work and the work of teachers. And so it made sense for us to explore this and hope that you now all understand a little bit more about SB 290 as well.